I may have to end up updating my forecast for a war with Iran, because Iran and the U.S. seem to be much closer to going to war with one another than any time I can remember in recent memory. This recent spats after the tanker bombings this past week has certainly led to a greater escalation than after the tanker bombings from a few weeks ago, or I guess maybe a month or two ago. The U.S. seems to be maintaining its ready footing, and Pompeo's going around trying to, quote, make the case that this tape that they've put out regarding Iran supposedly pulling limpet mines off the side of one of these tankers is genuine. And I have to wonder if they don't intend to use this as some sort of a justification for going to war. Why would Pompeo spend so much time trying to go around and talk to all the different foreign ministers in various countries and try and get them to side with the U.S. in this case and say that, Iran is terrible and they bombed these boats? I mean, this seems to me like a textbook U.S. build-up to war, where they're trying to go around to every country and get every country to condemn whoever it is that the U.S. wants to bomb and take out, just like they did with, Libya or Iraq or any number of other countries, Serbia. And the only thing that's giving me pause to really still think that this isn't the build-up to a war in the near term is my previous forecast that there would not be a war until next summer. And that itself was based largely on the fact that I thought that both Trump and Pompeo did not see themselves benefiting from a war in the near term. But the way the events are flowing, despite what I think the incentive structure may dictate, it doesn't seem to me that things are going to move that slowly. Things seem to be moving very quickly. If you look at Iran now, Iran is saying that they're going to imminently return to pre-2015 enrichment levels of uranium, which essentially means that they're not complying with the Iran deal at all. Why would they, considering that Trump pulled out, like 2 years ago, a year or two ago, year and a half ago maybe? He pulled out of the Iran deal, so Iran is not really bound by anything meaningful if the U.S. is not involved in the deal. But of course, this is one more thing that the Trump administration could, if they wanted to, use to justify a war with Iran, even though, again, they're the ones who backed out of the deal, so why would they be shocked if Iran decided to return to pre-2015 enrichment levels? My guess is they wouldn't, but this is something that you would try and do to try and goad Iran into giving you a reason to invade them. Some would say that the very motivation for pulling out of the Iran deal would be that it actually prevented a war in the near term, and that it only would lead to a war in the longer term. In fact, I remember listening to talk radio around the time that the Iran deal was signed by Obama back in the day. Their whole problem with it was saying that, hey, all this does is it kicks the can down the road on the war with Iran and pushes it down 10 years. All this means is that we're going to invade Iran in 10 years. We want to invade Iran now. It seems to me that Iran is essentially giving the administration, or at least the hawks within the administration, everything they want right now with respect to the nuclear program. By returning to pre-2015 enrichment levels, the U.S. then can make a very, very strong case that Iran is capable of, a nuclear breakout in 90 days or something. And, of course, they're going to use that and then, start lobbing missiles at Israel. And, of course, we have to invade Iran to save Israel for some reason. I think that in light of the way things are playing out, in light of the lack of de-escalation that is occurring after this bombing of these two tankers, I think it's safe to say that the administration is overall more hawkish than I had suspected. If there was any desire to try and delay a war until next summer, the administration, I don't think, would be trying as hard to make the case that Iran is an immediate threat to the safety of the global oil supply. I mean, you have all these other countries saying, hey, it could have been anyone. We don't know that it's Iran. The U.S. could have joined with all these other countries, like Germany and Japan, who, by the way, Japan owned the boat that got blown up. And Japan is not convinced for certain that Iran blew up these boats. That should tell you something about the level of intelligence that, or the quality of the intelligence that they have right now, because I'm sure that the Japanese have seen whatever it is that the U.S. has. assuming that there's something more to it than that grainy black and white video of Iran removing something that they claim was a limpet mine from the side of the boat. If the U.S. wanted to de-escalate or at least delay the conflict, what the U.S. could have done is they could have called for some kind of long, drawn-out international investigation that would be led by the U.S. into these explosions, and eventually what they could do is by the end, or they could have that investigation take a few months, and then they could conclude at the end that Iran were the ones that did it, and then the U.S. would start making this case for invading Iran, and that would be next year. If I were in Trump's position and I were trying to use the war with Iran for maximum political gain, that's what I would do. Because, of course, if Trump starts the war now, the war may not be going that well by the time that the election rolls around next year, and he may become unpopular, because wars, the arc of presidential popularity when it comes to war is they peak as soon as the war starts, and then they go down from there, and they usually crater and they end up at under 40% like George Bush or Lyndon Johnson. And so if Trump wants to actually benefit from this war personally, then what he needs to do is invade Iran in the summer of 2020, just before the election, so that his approval ratings spike because the country wants to support the military, and of course that means voting for the president that's currently in office for some reason. That would be a pretty good plan for securing re-election. It will give him a bit of a safety net if he's not doing that well in the polls. However, starting the war now may, depending on how the first year goes, end up sinking his chances and may actually making it more difficult for him to win re-election. I mean, George Bush was experiencing some blowback domestically against the Iraq war by 2004, and the war didn't start until 2003. So we're in the same situation now. We're in 2019, the election's in 2020. And keep in mind that a war with Iraq is a much simpler proposal than a war with Iran. Iran is a large country with a lot of mountains on the coast. It'd be very difficult to try and penetrate there. There's a lot more territory to try and occupy and control. I mean, we have to keep in mind that Iran was the Persian Empire, so it's a big place. They also have probably a better military. Of course, I still don't think that any military other than perhaps the Chinese, just because they're so massive, would stand up a decent chance to the U.S. military in combat. But still, there's a lot of hurdles that have to be crossed. And obviously, in the long term, you're not going to win any kind of a war here because you'll never be able to fight off the insurgency. The insurgency was, even in Iraq, counterinsurgency is a very difficult task, is my point. It's much easier to beat up an army, if you're an army, than it is to try and play whack-a-mole with some towel heads, as they like to call them. So Pompeo's made it clear that nukes are really their red line. And by nukes, I'm sure he means nuclear capability, which means these high levels of enrichment. So now that this news is broken, that Iran is going to return to its high levels of enrichment, if the administration is truly as hawkish as they appear to be now, which is, of course, far hawkish than I had assessed previously, then we very well may be hearing the direct, overt case for war here in the coming weeks. We're already hearing reports that the military is moving more troops to the Middle East in anticipation of something perhaps happening. So the troop buildup is occurring. The only thing that's left really is, I suppose, the propaganda campaign. But another thing to note is that the administration has said in the past that they don't need congressional approval to start a war with Iran. They would do that under the AUMF because somehow they're going to tie Iran to 9/11, even though all of the people involved in 9/11 were from like Saudi Arabia and Egypt. And of course they all believed in, the Saudi ideology, not the Iranian ideology. Nevertheless, the administration will somehow justify using their legalese and team of attorneys that they can in fact invade Iran. And I guess they will until perhaps a court stops them. But, I don't think that the Supreme Court even has much of an ability to enforce a ruling against the United States military. However, perhaps if it is ruled that the president can't invade Iran under the AUMF, the Democrats may be able to impeach him, next year. But I think that by that point they may get to the stage where he would lose re-election anyway, and it wouldn't make sense to impeach him. So this is obviously a very fluid situation. I'm going to take the next 24 hours to try and continue to assess my thoughts and try and see where I think what direction we're moving in, because things are certainly moving quickly. So if you personally gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and subscribing. And if you do subscribe, please do click the bell, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you in the next one.